like to now introduce a man that's probably got a better social media platform than I have. And I say that modestly. Todd was until recently at Kelly Services, but is now officially at King Content, and I'd like to welcome him to the stage. Please make him welcome. Todd Wheatland. Thank you. Thank you.
I am on? Yes. Okay. Thank you. So, yes, I have recently just crossed the dark side, joined the agency. I've been living overseas for a long time, and I was back in Australia about this time 12 months ago, and I spent a lot of that time catching up with people and really having to explain what it is that I did for a job. Now, fast forward 6 months later, and I don't know what you guys have been smoking during that time, but every taxi driver has an opinion on content marketing at the moment, right? It's super, super hot. So what I really wanted to focus on, and I think it's building on a lot of the things we've already heard, is what I believe is really a systemic cultural shift that needs to happen longer term for a company to really succeed in content marketing. Let me step you through a little bit of that. Now, a lot of this is coming from my background, which has been predominantly big organization B2B, but we also have a fairly hefty B2C side, which we've been drilling the last couple of years as well. So I've tried to give a balance for everyone here. I know there's a lot of big brands and both sides of the equation, as well as agencies here today. So let's just think about organizational structure for a minute. And those of you who are in big companies in particular, and Anton mentioned this earlier, it looks a little bit like this, right? You've got sales, you've got marketing. Way over there, you've got PR. No one really knows what they're doing anymore, but they're over there. Sorry for the PR people in the audience. And that's kind of the way it works. It's always, and we've built to scale in this sort of way around this sort of fields of expertise and domains and empire building. But the reality of how communication works is a little bit like this, right? So I'm a marketer, and marketers obviously always do awesome work. And we pat ourselves on the back and give ourselves high fives, and we throw it at the fence, and sales looks at it and goes, okay, I'll go out and sell now. And marketing just looks at that and goes, oh, you fools, you don't know how to sell. Look at that, that's great. We have the worst sales organization in the world. And that's the pretty common pattern you see in a lot of large organizations. The beauty of content, when it's done well, I believe, is to actually bring marketing and sales much closer together, okay? And I think, especially in the B2B side, that has been proved in many, many cases, and we referred to a couple of those earlier. One of the starting questions on that journey is where content marketing sits. And again, a common story I hear, and certainly something that happened to me. I excitedly get anointed as the guy who's going to be responsible for content within Kelly Services. So I excitedly start to speak with people about this incident, about this new opportunity that I have. And this is a typical reaction. Because people have content in their title. So they're, well, I do content. I put stuff on the intranet, that's content. I'm in our digital team, or I'm in the e-business team, or I'm in PR, for goodness sakes. We're sort of the messaging content sort of people. Everyone's got a viewpoint, just like everyone here. No doubt we're all coming at this intersection from many different fields, whether it's SEO, agency, or corporate, but it's very easy to trip internally political and turf battles whenever you start to talk about content. And the most successful way of trying to overcome people's natural reaction when you're trying to get them excited about this new function is for them to, I mean, how can we shift people from this sort of thing to these warm, fuzzy moments, right? That's really what we're trying to do, because the more blocks you get internally, the more difficult the journey is going to be. And you'll be relegated as a tactic and something that's to the side of the core of the beast that's trying to reject you. And the philosophy that I take is that content marketing is a philosophy. It's not a department. It's not someone coming in here to set up a little thing independent. Let's think about the way this has traditionally worked. Think about when social first came out, or even when SEO first came out. It was like the CMO doesn't quite get it. It's a thing. Everyone's talking about this SEO thing. I need to get an SEO guy. social comes along, everyone's talking about the social thing, I'm going to have to get one of those social guys. And now content's come along, and I'm going to have to get one of those content things. I intrinsically believe that's fine if it's acting as a change agent, but just like the discussions about social now lean towards its social business, not social media as a function, it's social business as an educated group of people with those skills and processes across the organization. That's exactly what we should be trying to achieve in content. Save some of that short-term pain and start to bring people along in the journey here. So let me share a few thoughts and tips around how I've seen engaging the organization is. And at a very basic level, starting with whatever tools, whatever models that actually work to communicate within your organization, try to find a pathway, try to find a description of what content marketing can mean that other people in the organization can see themselves in, okay? Because we talked a little bit before about external voices. There are lots of people who can get the voice of the customer, who can understand client problems, client needs. There's lots of people who can see themselves here and can see themselves as part of this process, not pushed to the side by this new department, but actually part of this thing that's coming in. And all around this ideation and creation of content, it's not just the production of content and saying, well, this person's the author of this piece, or this is, co-authors of this report. It's actually getting people excited and engaged throughout the whole prospect, including the distribution teams and the social teams and people. So everyone has to see how this is a layer that's helping to unite all of the workings of the organization. One thing that I think a lot of people significantly underestimate, that came up in the panel earlier, was just how frequently you have to communicate. I still cannot believe how many times I've talked to the same groups of people, literally dozens of times over the last few years, about very basic content marketing topics, and still there are light bulbs going off in the room, okay? You cannot possibly over-communicate it. It really is an intrinsic thing, and we do everything from going back to this sort of model, and again, someone mentioned this sort of, marketing's enhanced role in sales, all these stats around 70% of the buyer's journey is taken before they even want to speak to a consultant or a salesperson. These sorts of tools, these simple things that are readily available, really help people. And it's really, I also find that it doesn't help, even if you don't necessarily have a strong working relationship with people, and this is common that I hear in a lot of companies, treat people intelligently, give them the backgrounds, don't just tell them how they're going to execute or where they plug into this. Actually help bring them on the journey of education as to why this is a bigger thing, and that's what's leading the reality of what you're asking them to be a part of. One thing that I found very effective is that it's trying to create envy within an organization. And the way we've achieved this in the past is by finding those people. Anton spoke about identifying people who have the NPS scores, or people who are already your most passionate fans. We also look at people who already have the most active internal social profiles, because they have the quickest ability to influence and to be seen visibly internally. So things like getting your CEO to agree to blog, if that's a thing. Getting a head of a division, or even someone who's not even the head of a division, and really supporting them and helping them dramatically to develop a position and to become the expert in a particular field. I can assure you, if you can do that with a few key individuals, then you'll get a lot of people calling you and saying, I want some of that action. Okay? Now, it's a very overused term, but this whole concept of trying to make people rock stars within your company, I totally relate to that term. I really have seen it as my role to really breed to build a bench strength of rock stars, people who are so passionately excited about not just being an author or not just an author of content itself that they have shared, but also that they've helped to produce and be a part of, even if they're not the front piece of it. Because it's those people all along the path, and these are the steps we can take. Remember, there's many layers of the content marketing process of production that people can play a role in influencing. And if they can feel that sense of ownership and belonging, that's where you get the real benefit around distribution and promotion. We spoke a little bit about that. Darren spoke a little bit about that before, but let me highlight, I guess, my view on it. So earned and paid, I think we all know what those terms have been mentioned a few times today. But let's just focus on the earned thing. And this is really where a lot of the action is happening in content overseas now as well. So by creating the rock stars, whether they are external influencers or your own internal employees or your clients, okay? So if we think about the way this has built, probably 2 years ago, influencers started to really become the hot thing for content distribution, for this sort of earned content distribution. Now we're probably not quite at the peak, but Sky mentioned before about employee advocacy tools. There's a lot of tools out in the marketplace, especially big organizations. It's a way for large companies who are not as nimble as small companies to actually leverage the strengths that they do have, which is their scale, their number of employees. If you can get a large number, tens of thousands of employees or hundreds of employees involved in using these tools and getting excited and wanting to share that content, that is a beautiful way to get this earned promotion stuff here. The third layer, which is, there's a few startups trying to crack this code as well. Next will be the wave of client advocacy, which is how do we get clients more involved, not just in creating the content through case studies or white papers, whatever it may be, but actually being a part of that journey and wanting to share and perhaps even being rewarded for sharing that content down the path. So the way I think of it is that content really sits at the center. It's not, it's not a new thing. It's not an add-on. It's not that thing. It's not that guy who's going to do the content. A few people have referred to this. It's just a different way of doing things. And we have to forget about trying to see it as a bolt-on or something new. It's a lot of different tactics and things that have already been doing, but tied together in a way that gets everyone working in unison. And in an ideal scenario, what you have is content, and don't pay too much attention to these terms, I just threw them in there as examples, but it's content that is first. Content leads the discussion. Content comes, and that is what fuels the PR strategy. Content is what fuels the social media strategy. Content is what fuels the live event strategy. It's what fuels the books, it's what fuels any number of things, but it's that unifying thing that all of marketing can connect to. Objectives, this has been talked about a lot, but the real thing is that a lot of people, especially in this early stage, go, everyone's doing content, we've got to get us some of that content. And that can come from up or down or any part of the organization, but it's someone finds some money somewhere and let's go do some of this stuff. And often that, without a defined strategy or objectives, then it's like, well, that's great, but there's no feedback, there's no iteration process, there's no, this is what we were trying to achieve and now we can tweak this and try to make it better. We're all familiar with this funnel syncing, but you can also apply funnel syncing to your overall strategy as well as the positioning of each of your individual pieces. Sorry. Another topic that Darren spoke about before was to insource or outsource. So I've got some views on this. So the reasons people typically outsource are for cost, trying to do something more cheaply, speed, which is definitely one of the main motivators for my organization previously, which was we just need to get to market more quickly. We may have resources internally, but this will overload them, we'll swamp them. If we're going to go with the scale we need, we've got to run. And access to talent, access to strategic thinking, access to skills that can help you lay it. Now, there's one other thing for content marketing in particular that's one that I find is a good driver for outsourcing or not. Now, I actually used an image similar to this a few years ago in the US, and I actually had a rifle sight over this, and it said, "Kill the cheerleaders," okay? Now, I was slammed. I actually thought I'd have my visa applications refused in future. I had the National Association of Cheerleaders telling me that I was an evil person. But the essence is that you have people in your organization, possibly even yourselves historically, we've grown up thinking that we need, if we have an opportunity to tell the world how awesome our company is, and that's what we should be doing. Because we're used to this push mentality. Okay, I've got a piece on the stage. Let me give you the 2 slides to start with about my company and how awesome we are. And then just as your eyes are glazing, I can get in and hopefully try to recover and dig myself out of that and tell you why I'm interesting to listen to. Still, after years of doing this, and everyone I know who's been doing this for years, you have people hiding behind pot plants in corners trying to write blog posts in the 2nd or 3rd paragraph so it says, by the way, we're really awesome, we rode on a white horse and saved everyone, it was great. Okay, it cannot help. And this is one of the fundamental reasons why a lot of people turn to outsourcing. It's because the tone, the culture, the beliefs, the skill set internally just isn't able to make that shift fast enough for you to actually make a break and do something very different. Content marketing isn't about you. No one cares about your company. No one cares about your products. They care about their problems. They want their problems solved. That's what you have to write about. At the same time, and this came up earlier in the panel, you have to have an understanding of who you are and what your authentic voice is. Again, very difficult for companies to do. We've spent decades creating whole departments to make sure that the truth about the company never gets out, that you control that message outbound, right? Now we're sort of learning that the most effective way is actually to forget all that and to actually push for this transparency. And that's the new black is definitely transparency. It's people can't make an emotional connection with anyone who thinks that they're perfect. Okay? You've got to be able to see flaws in someone. You've got to see a human element to something to be able to have an emotional connection. And that's exactly the balance that companies are trying to find right now. And it's difficult, especially for large companies. Do you try to find a common cultural viewpoint or of tone of language, of perception that you apply for all of your external comms? Or do you celebrate the diversity within your organization? Personally, the latter is much easier, and that's certainly the model that I embrace in most of my discussions. And I'd like to close with the topic that's, I guess it's kind of the elephant in the room in a way. We've all come from different positions on this, but whether on the client side or agency side, we've got a legacy of thinking about, of working in a Marcom sense around campaigns. And content marketing is not a campaign. This is a commitment. It's a commitment to telling the truth. It's a commitment to frequency. It's a commitment to consistency. It's a commitment to understanding the needs of your audience and not abusing that relationship. It's built up over time. Darren referred to the slow growth and the build and the plateau and hitting that J curve. And that's a story that I hear everywhere. There's, anyone who commits and maintains and tweaks and learns and evolves, this stuff works. But you can't think of it as a campaign because then you don't get the iterative value and you don't understand how to improve it. Content is a commitment, not a campaign. Thank you very much.